Welcome to This Explainer. Right now, we are jumping straight into a massive, comprehensive data set from the World Health Organization all about global mental health. We hear the phrase mental health literally everywhere these days, at the office, on your social feeds, in the news, but honestly, the true structural reality of how we experience it and how we actually treat it on a global scale is still deeply misunderstood. So let's just dive right into what the data is actually telling us.
Okay, let's kick things off with a super simple but kind of uncomfortable question about your own day-to-day life. Are you actually mentally healthy? Take a second and really think about that. I mean, most of us just do a quick scan, right? Like, well, I haven't cried in my car today and I don't have a clinical diagnosis, so yeah, I'm fine. But the WHO wants us to look at this in a completely different way.
Look at this paradigm shift because it's absolutely huge. On one side, you have the old way of thinking, which is basically just the mere absence of a mental disorder. And then on the other side, you've got the WHO's actual gold standard, a holistic state of well-being. Basically, just because a doctor hasn't diagnosed you with a condition doesn't automatically mean you're experiencing mental wellness. It's like, just because you don't have a broken leg doesn't mean you're ready to run a marathon, you know? The absence of a problem isn't the same thing as a mind that's truly thriving. So, how do we actually define it then? Well, the WHO anchors mental health as a fundamental state of well-being that dictates how we function, how we cope, and how we thrive. And look at the specific action words they use here. Cope, realize, learn, work, contribute. Mental health isn't just this passive vibe of feeling okay. It's an active, dynamic resource. It's literally the fuel you use every single day to deal with the friction of being human. It's what lets you bounce back from a terrible Tuesday at work, really connect with your family, and actually reach your potential.
To really wrap our heads around this issue, we're going to follow a quick roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll redefine what mental health actually means. Second, we'll unpack the root causes that shape our minds. Third, we'll look at the sheer global impact of the situation. And finally, we'll explore the WHO's systemic framework for strengthening our response. All right, let's hit section 1, redefining mental health and moving way beyond the binary switch.
The absolute most crucial thing to understand here is that we all exist on a sliding, complex continuum. This completely shatters that old idea of mental health being a simple on and off switch. You aren't just permanently healthy or permanently sick. We're all sliding back and forth on the spectrum our entire lives. Some years you might be totally peaking, feeling great, but then maybe you face a sudden job loss or grief or just severe burnout, and you slide right down toward distress. This continuum is universal, but your specific spot on it, that is entirely unique to you.
Now, if we're all constantly sliding back and forth on this continuum, we have to look closely at what's actually pushing and pulling us. That brings us to unpacking the root causes and the environments that shape our minds. So, our lives are deeply, deeply interconnected, and the WHO breaks down the determinants of our mental health into 3 big buckets. First up, psychological. So that's your personal coping skills, your emotional intelligence. Second is biological, your genetics, brain chemistry, physical health. And third, social and environmental, your community, where you live, your relationships. You absolutely cannot look at one without the others. Like, you might have a genetic predisposition to anxiety, but you have an incredible support system that keeps you thriving. Or on the flip side, you might have amazing coping skills, but you're in an environment so toxic that it just completely wears down your defenses over time. Zooming out even further, we hit these massive structural determinants. These are universal environmental stressors that heavily, heavily dictate where we sit on that continuum. We're talking widespread poverty, exposure to violence, systemic inequality, environmental deprivation, and severe chronic work stress. Guys, these aren't just political buzzwords. The WHO recognizes these as direct, quantifiable threats to human brain chemistry and emotional stability. When entire populations are subjected to chronic economic fear or daily work stress, mental health disorders absolutely skyrocket. I mean, let's be real, you cannot simply meditate your way out of systemic poverty or constant exposure to violence. Big structural issues demand big structural solutions. When you compound all these individual and structural root causes across the globe, it creates an impact that demands our immediate attention. So let's look at this shared worldwide crisis. Today, a staggering 1 in 8 people globally live with a mental disorder. 1 in 8. That is nearly a billion people. Let that sink in. It makes it overwhelmingly clear that this is a universally shared human experience, not some rare anomaly. If you're standing in a crowded coffee shop, or sitting in a busy office, or just looking at your extended family, the statistical reality is that someone right there is actively navigating a mental health condition. This is a massive, quiet crisis, and it is happening in plain sight every single day. Yet, when we look at the data, there is a shocking inequality in how we actually treat this crisis. In high-income countries, sure, it's definitely not perfect, but there's a measurable baseline of access to therapy and medication. But look at the drastic drop-off in lower-income regions. In some places, treatment coverage for severe mental health conditions is practically non-existent. We have 1 billion people struggling, but your ability to get help is pretty much entirely dictated by the geographic and economic lottery of where you were born. Recognizing that massive, gaping hole in care brings us to the very core of the WHO's mission, strengthening our response and laying out the framework to actually fix this systemic global crisis. To tackle this, the WHO proposes a really clear, actionable pathway. Right now, most global health systems are entirely reactive, right? They wait until a patient is in a full-blown crisis before they apply treatment. The WHO says no, we have to move upstream. Step 1 is promotion, actively creating environments where people can actually thrive. Step 2 is prevention, identifying toxic stressors like a terrible workplace or economic strain and mitigating them before they break people down. And only then do we rely on Step 3, treatment, making sure care is accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. A foundational piece of this new response is a major shift in what treatment actually looks like. The WHO is strongly pushing to abandon the totally outdated model of isolated psychiatric hospitals. For a long time, society's answer was basically just removing people from their communities and locking them away in distant institutions. But the data is crystal clear that is ineffective, and it often does way more harm than good. The future is all about embedded, community-based care networks. That means putting mental health support in the places you already go every day: general hospitals, local clinics, schools, community centers. Instead of sending people away, we support them right inside their own familiar environments, surrounded by their actual social safety nets. Pulling off this kind of community-based strategy requires what the WHO calls multi-sectoral action, basically an all-hands-on-deck approach. The health department can't fix this by itself. We need government policy reform to actually fund initiatives. We need schools teaching emotional resilience to kids. We need companies building genuinely supportive workplaces so people don't burn out. And we need housing and social protection programs to eliminate the environmental anxieties of homelessness and food insecurity. Mental health is quite literally a society-wide project. This entire comprehensive framework builds up to one undeniable truth, directly outlined by the WHO, which is this: mental health is a basic human right, and it is crucial to personal, community, and socioeconomic development, period. It is not a luxury. It is not second place to physical health. It is the absolute foundation that human progress is built on. Without it, our communities fracture, our economies stall out, and our personal lives suffer. Protecting mental health is protecting human dignity itself. I'm going to leave you with this final vital thought. We've talked about the global data, the structural causes, and the WHO's sweeping solutions, but bring it all back to your own life. As you go about your day-to-day, look closely at the structures around you: your job, your neighborhood, your local government. How does your community support or fail your place on the mental health continuum? Understanding how these systems impact us is the first real step in advocating for a world where well-being is actually within reach for everyone. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking the right questions.